So as we continue looking at the decisions that managers make, we have looked at decisions related to production. How are we going to make the product? What are we going to make? We looked at productivity, so how much can we make? We looked at measuring whether or not that is profitable, and we looked at, in terms of the operations, do we have enough money to fund that production? So all of that's been related to the performance of individuals and how that translates into the performance of the organization. What we're going to move into now is motivation. Because when we look at overall performance of an organization, we have ability of our workers. So we have here, are they properly trained? Okay, so do we have the right people in the right roles? And we've looked already at some of the historical individuals in management who have talked about identifying the correct way to do things and identifying the right people for those positions. So we're talking about who? We talked about Taylor, and we talked about the scientific management approach to management. And it was really about in terms of the one right way to do things. So if we have one right way to do things, then we have a process. We have people who are trained in that process. We provide them the necessary resources. They have the necessary skills. Okay, all of this adding to how much people can produce, how they're performing, so that, or ultimately we can look at how well the organization is performing. What we're going to focus on now is motivation. So if performance is ability times motivation, we need to look at, do we have a motivated workforce? And we recognize that employee engagement or motivation is highly tied to business outcomes. If your employees are not motivated, your business doesn't do well. If they are not engaged, they are likely to have high absenteeism. So if you hate going to work, you're going to be more likely to call in sick. You are more likely to leave the organization if you're not engaged. And that high level of turnover causes cost to the organization. If you are not motivated to do your job, you're not going to pay a lot of attention to production in terms of quality. There'll be a lot of defects. This is going to cause safety issues, of course. And so we can see that if employees are not engaged, it hurts the business in terms of performance. If the employees are engaged, then they will be more productive. They are more likely to produce and contribute, which will increase profitability and increase customer satisfaction. So we can't solely base on ability of the individual and the organization to determine performance. We also need to consider motivation or engagement of our workforce. So let's look at motivation. How do you motivate your workers? So we're going to look at a number of different individuals' theories on how you motivate workers. And so start thinking for yourself in terms of how you would motivate your workforce. Well, if we go back to the Industrial Revolution, so back to the classical view of management, we look at an individual named Robert Owen. And those of you who have watched the economics videos, you know Robert Owen. He is the father of socialism and the cooperative style of the economy. Well, how do you motivate people according to Robert Owen? You motivate people by giving them a smaller work day so that they have time to rest and they have time to play. So Robert Owen advocated an 8-hour work day, 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of recreation, 8 hours of rest. So the early classical view in terms of motivating the employee, and we're just going to make a running list here. So classical, I'll just make this a little bigger too. So during our classical view, there is some early views in terms of some work-life balance. We see this work-life balance continue to be an emphasis by managers. For example, if you look at Henry Ford, so we're looking at around 1910, 1920. early production of Ford vehicles, Henry Ford was advocating at the time for a 6-day work week, not a 7-day work week, with the idea being that if the workers could take a day off, then they would be more likely to buy vehicles and go out and use those cars to go to other places. So we do see the idea of work-life balance, not working too much, not working 24/7 in terms of a motivator as far back as the Industrial Revolution. Now we recognize that not all ideas have merit. And even ideas that do have merit, we do have to understand the context in which they were originated. So another motivator that Robert Owen used was what was called the silent monitor. So in 1800, in the town of New Lanark, they had a cotton mill and they're producing goods here. And so what Robert Owen wanted was an ability to do performance management. So we're going to recognize the good employees and the not so good employees. And so they held what was called a monitor. So that's this little device here. It would hang next to each worker's station. And the idea here is that the monitor would be turned daily to reflect how good the worker was. If it showed white, you were an excellent employee. If it was yellow, you were a good employee. If it was blue, then they're indifferent. And if it's black, you are a bad employee. We need to recognize that while we might continue on performance management today and giving feedback to workers, that what was done in the past doesn't necessarily reflect how we view things today. And so we need to recognize that this method with the monitors has a racist origin to it. The idea being that if you are a white European worker, you must be an excellent worker. And if you are of Asian descent, then you are second best. And if you are of African descent, then you are the last in line. So we recognize the origins that management has in terms of racism, and we recognize the impact that has and the legacy that creates as we look at the history of management. And as we look forward in terms of how we want to manage organizations, we recognize that we take some things and we leave other things behind. So as we look at Owen's silent monitor, what we look at here is the idea of performance evaluations. And we will, as we look forward in terms of equity and diversity and inclusion, we want to make sure that the methods we have for performance assessment are not racist, are not biased in their behavior. And we will get to discussions in later videos in terms of inclusivity. Right now, let's look at the issue of performance management in terms of giving feedback. And so with Owen's silent monitor, notice we are giving feedback to employees and that feedback or performance is public. So here we are stating to everyone else how well you as an employee are performing. So we have public performance evaluations. Okay. All right, so that was around the Industrial Revolution. We move forward from the classical view into the scientific management view. And we've talked in previous videos about scientific management. So first, let's write that's Owen, who was doing work-life balance and public performance evaluations. And so during scientific management, we have Taylor. What did Taylor say in terms of how people are motivated? Right? People are motivated based on pay. And so Taylor was an advocate for giving people enough pay to encourage them to do the work. What we're going to do is we are going to move into, so that was scientific. We're going to move into looking at a period of time that looks at behavioral management. So we recognize during that scientific management movement that the problem is that the jobs are boring and repetitious, and we're treating people like machines. So as we move in the behavioral view of management, we need to figure out how do we get more out of the workers. Maybe pay alone is not enough. So we're going to look at motivation. Motivation is the process by which a person's efforts are energized, directed, and sustained toward attaining a goal. And there are 3 parts to motivation: energy, direction, and persistence. So I'm actually just going to add this list, if I can, to our list up here. So we looked at aspects of ability in all our previous videos. Now let's look at aspects of motivation. So one is energy. Are your workers tired? Are they stressed? Are they emotionally drained? So as we think about the impacts, for example, of COVID and isolation of working from home, how are your employees motivated as they come back? Do they have energy? Well, they may be energized by the ability to be around their coworkers and to have that social interaction. Or they might be quite weary from having to turn on a dime and constantly change what's happening throughout the pandemic. So they feel tired, physically tired, emotionally tired. And maybe what they're finding now is that as they go into meetings, because people have missed that social aspect, everything is taking more time because there's all of the socializing that is included in the meetings that had been essentially pulled out during COVID. So is that impacting people's energy and their ability to do the work? Right? So we talk about energy, a measure of intensity or drive. Then we look at the idea of direction. So maybe your people have energy. Is that energy moving in the right direction? So where is the effort being channeled? We'd like to think that we have engaged and motivated workers, and so they're putting all of their time and effort into furthering the causes and objectives, the outcomes of the organization. We have to worry about something called the actively disengaged. So when we talk about workers being disengaged, so they're not motivated, they're not engaged, that may be that they don't try. They don't put in the extra effort. They don't speak up at meetings. That is disengaged. But even bigger issue for your organization than disengaged is the actively disengaged. Because these people have lots of energy, but it's not being directed in the direction that you want it to be. So these would be the individuals that in meetings object to everything because no matter what you say, they're going to disagree with you. And they spend their time complaining to their colleagues and making their colleagues unhappy. And so it's not just them themselves not being motivated, but they're essentially a virus within the organization that is causing other people to not be motivated. And so they have energy and effort, but it's not furthering the direction of the organization. In fact, it is going in the other direction. So it's undermining the efforts of the organization. So we have energy, we have direction, and the last one is persistence. When your workers run into obstacles, run into challenges, things that they just can't quite figure out, do they give up? Or do they try to find a solution? Do they work and contact other people to find a solution? Are they continuing to put the energy and direction into it? So persistence is the sustained effort to achieve a goal and satisfy a need. Are they keeping at it? And so part of motivation is that when we run into roadblocks, are we keeping at the work? Or do we just give up? If people give up and don't try to solve the issues, the problems, the challenges, then there is a lack of motivation. So what we're going to do in the next couple of videos is look at different theories about how to get your workers more motivated. We've already started that list by looking at classical and scientific views. We're going to move into the behavioral view of management, and the humanistic view of management as we look at different ways to motivate our workforce.